Good morning, everyone. This is Hammersmith Chess Club Junior Hour, or better said, it is Junior Hour in 5 minutes. And this specific video is the summary of the game we reviewed yesterday. Yesterday, 14th of April, we looked back at exactly 18 years ago, 14th of April 2002, when the world champion Magnus Carlsen, well, then he was 11 years old, played against the Hammersmith Chess Club member, Keith Arkell. Not a member then, but already Grandmaster. It was a Norwegian tournament. Keith ended up just behind the winner, half a point. And this was the only recorded game, as far as I know, of Keith Arkell against Magnus Carlsen, and Keith Arkell won. Keith Arkell was white. We went through the opening sequence yesterday in a little more depth, but I want to finish this in 5 minutes. So Queen's Gambit declined, exchange on f6, exchange on d5, and a specialty of Keith Arkell, b4, early b4. Of course, b4 is typical in this line with the kind of minority attack on the queen side by white. Standard moves in the development, b5, closing the queen side. Of course, Keith Arkell doesn't allow that. And with a5, Keith prevents the knight to develop from d7 via b6 to c4. But that allowed black a very nice riposte. And indeed, Magnus Carlsen, even only 11 years old, at I think below 2,200 FIDE points, already exploited this move with a very nice c5. Well, c5 looks prohibited because there are pawns on b4 and c and d4, but due to a tactical finesse, it was possible. The d pawn cannot take on c5 because of the c3 knight not defended, and the bishop on f6 would take it immediately, even winning a tempo because it would attack the rook on a5. So you can take with a b pawn, but again, it's possible to retake with a knight. If white takes on c5, then black would take on c3 and would capture the a pawn afterwards and would have two connected passed pawns far away from the kings. Two connected passed pawns against one connected passed pawn, one passed pawn of white, and even that pawn might be lost later on. So white cannot take, retreated the bishop, and now already on the 16th move, the decisive mistake by Magnus Carlsen, rook c8. Rook c8 looks so natural. The rook occupies the open file, completely open. There is a threat to c3. The knight on c5 still cannot be taken, or can it? Because the knight on c3 is still not protected. So rook c8 looks very natural, but it was a mistake. Of course, in hindsight, we always know better, and with the help of the engines, we know better. Rook e8 would have been required. The reason is, and we will see it later on, that, well, we say there is no knight on f6, but a bishop. That means a knight naturally defends h7 as an entry point for white. The bishop does not. So there is a potential threat that with this open diagonal, the bishop on c2, or it could also have been on b1, and the queen on c2 or d3 would threaten to move into here, into h7. For that case, for that scenario, black might need an escape path via f8 to e7. But of course, with the engines, in hindsight, we all know better, and Carlsen then played rook c8. And now Keith Arkell was able, with a technical finesse to exploit that. He could take on c5. Remember, the bishop came to c2 from b3, but now it's on c2. It's already on this diagonal. And Keith exploited this with queen d3. Indeed, if bishop takes c3, then also here queen d3 is possible, threatening mate now. And so if now the rook goes to e8, then already white is a piece up. White is a piece up already now. So black took on c5. White, queen d3 threatens mate. In this case now, black prevents it by g6. Of course, with the idea later to move the bishop to f5 and to threaten the queen and indirectly the bishop behind. But Keith had calculated a little further. He protected his knight on c3, and that's the only way to protect all these pieces with moving the knight from f3 in between. All other moves would have lost a piece. Still, Magnus Carlsen went for bishop f5. All other moves would have lost because white would have protected, would have built a kind of fortress with knight from c3 to e2. White takes on f5. What other possibility there was? There was none. Now black can take on c3, threatens the queen. It seems that black recaptures the piece because next move it will take the knight. Okay, check here on h6. The only way to keep the knight, and there are two possibilities for black, either to move to g7 or to move to h7. Indeed, g7 we looked at yesterday and found that it is even worse, but also h7 does not help. Of course, if white retreats the queen now because the queen is attacked and is a valuable piece, then black would immediately take on h6, and I think black would have at least materially already a balanced position, but probably a better position because it has the much more active pieces. But Keith found a very nice tactical continuation. He took on f7. Black took the queen, white took the queen, and black challenged the bishop on c2. Now, of course, we see why the king on h7 is better than on g7, because on g7 there would have been a check and directly capturing the rook. Well, the knight anyway goes to e7 to attack the rook, but here black doesn't lose a tempo. It can move the rook away. And we saw that it is better to keep the bishop than the exchange on a1. So now we can summarize the situation. Materially, white is 2 pawn units up. It has 2 minor pieces plus a pawn. Black has a rook. But of course, it's not just the 2 pawns difference, the material difference, it's also the positional difference. And it's clear that white, with the next move, knight d4, would completely solidify its position here. Black cannot do anything with the moves. So black tried a nice idea. If white would capture the exchange, the rook here, then black would have slight chance with 2 connected passed pawns. But Keith went in for the safe way, went knight d4, and I think sooner or later the pawn on d5 will be captured. The king will go to the center. There is no entry point for the black rooks, and white will in the end win. So Magnus Carlsen resigned and Keith won against the later world champion.